George Jacobs served in the United States Navy aboard the USS Daly. He was wounded in action when a suicide plane exploded just off his ship, thus earning the Purple Heart.
My name is George C. Jacobs. I've served in World War II in the Navy aboard a destroyer, USS Daly, DD 519, and I was a yeoman 3rd class.
George, tell me about yourself. Where did you grow up?
I grew up in what is West Knoxville at the time. It's probably right in the city center of Knoxville now. I was born and went to the hospital at a Riverside Hospital. It's over where the Hyatt Regency is now, and it's been torn down. And I went to school at Van Gilder and Grammar School, Tyson Junior High School at junior high, and Knoxville High School, and graduated in June of 1943.
How did you get into the U.S. Navy?
Well, I was really drafted, and I guess when I graduated, I stayed at home for about 5 months, and they drafted me, and I went to Chattanooga. And just before that, I was playing football and banged my knee up, and it was about the size of a basketball when I went through the draft setup, and they gave me a 6 months deferment. And after that, I came back and worked in Oak Ridge for about 6 months, and they called me back, and I told this guy when I went through the line that I was small and I'd like to be in the Navy, and he said, "You're in the Navy."
What was America like back then? I mean, going to war, and you know that there was a war already going on.
Well, I had a brother who was in the Air Force, and most of my high school graduates had already gone into service. From Fort Oglethorpe, I went back to Chattanooga, where they told me I had 5 different places to go, and San Diego happened to be one of them. So I selected San Diego and went through boots in San Diego for 6 weeks.
How did you get to San Diego?
Went by train, and seemed like it took us 3 days to get through the state of Texas. It was quite an experience.
And then after boot camp, how did you wind up on a ship?
After boot camp, we were to be sent to Camp Shoemaker in California for assignment, and we were to leave early one morning, and we got on the train and they held us up, and we kept waiting and waiting for another troop train to come in to go to Shoemaker. So instead of leaving that early that morning, it was about noon, I guess, or more before we left. And when we got closer to Shoemaker, they sidetracked the train, and we sat there for a couple of hours waiting for another train to go by. And we got into Camp Shoemaker about midnight that night, same day. And they told us we'd get our assignments when we got into Shoemaker. And I looked on the board, and my name was to go out at 8 o'clock that night to be assigned to the USS USS Indianapolis. It was a cruiser. I was trying to think where they were shipped out of, but anyway, I didn't make that, and I stayed there one more day, and then they shipped me up to Oakland, California, to the U.S. Naval Base there, and assigned to the USS Daly.
So when you checked into the USS Daly, what was the ship life like?
Well, it was the biggest thing I'd ever seen before. But they had a crew of about 325 men, and I was tickled to death that at least we had a warm bed, hot meals, and I could take a bath, and the ship was small enough to maneuver, but not big enough to where we had to get in dress blues every time we went to eat. And we stayed there about 3 weeks before we were prepared to leave.
And then you left for war.
left for the Pacific, and before we left, this boxer and I was sent to a gunnery school, and he was tough. He could throw those shells in that gun, and I could hand them to him. So we won first place in this gunnery course, and that's why I was assigned a twin 40 millimeter when on board ship. And after we sailed out from San Francisco, they looked at one of the letters that I wrote, and somebody said they could read my writing and they couldn't read half of the other crew's letters, and so they made me a yeoman, and that was my job on board ship.
And then tell me about your battle stations.
My battle station was on a port twin 40 in the front of the ship. There was twin 40s on each side of the ship and two 5-inch guns forward. And I was the second loader, and the boxer turned out to be a torpedoman, so they didn't assign him to that gun. They put him in the one on the middle of the ship and gave me a boy named Wallace McAleer as the first loader.
So, being on the USS Daly and out in the Pacific, did you see action right away?
We left San Diego escorting a destroyer, two, and a carrier and a battle wagon, and we went directly to the Philippines. And we did some escorting around and searches around the Philippines. And then at that time we started invading these different islands between there and Japan.
And tell me about April 28th, 1945.
Well, it's quite an experience. I guess one other excitement I had before there was we shore bombarded many of the islands before we got to Iwo, and one of them was Aishima, I believe is the name of it, and that's where Ernie Powell was killed. We blasted that island for 3 days before they invaded it, and then when they invaded it, those Japs came out of the holes and caves and everywhere else. But we went for several islands invasions like that till we got to Iwo Jima sometime in around the middle of February of '45. And we blasted Iwo Jima for 3 days before they invaded it. And then from there we went to Okinawa, and we arrived there on April the 1st of '45, and we shelled it for 3 days prior to that invasion. And then after that, they put us on radar picket, because at that time they were trying to build an airfield on Okinawa. So we were to go out and intercept these Jap planes coming in to keep them from bombing the airfield so they could build it. We were out there several weeks, I guess, before April the 28th, and at that time they said 50 planes were coming in. I don't think that many attacked us, but anyway, it was on April the 28th. We knocked down 5 of them, and one of them came in on the starboard side. It was burning, and it flipped over the top of our ship and landed just off of the port side of our destroyer, and it blew a big hole in the side, and that just below my gun. And the Wallace McAleer, who was afraid to be up on there in the open, down there as my second loader, his head was blown off, and the doctor's head was blown off. I don't remember much, except I had on a K-Pock life jacket, and I was knocked backwards, and my jacket was torn to shreds. and I didn't even know I'd been hit until I noticed blood running down my leg, and I'd got shrapnel in my right thigh, and that was on April 28, 1945. Our ship listed to one side because we had a big hole in it, and we made it back to Okinawa, where they put us on a repair ship, and we stayed there for several weeks till they repaired our ship. From there, we were sent over to the eastern China Sea to see if the Japanese had any ships or fleet there, and went into the Yangtze River. And when we came back, we're preparing for invasion of Japan, and they had a hurricane hit, and it delayed our departure. And about that time is when they dropped the atomic bomb, and on August the 16th, I guess, they dropped the one in Nagasaki. So after this war peace was signed on September the 2nd, we went into Sasebo, Japan, which was a submarine base. That's where we were supposed to go anyway during the war. And that was just real close to Nagasaki, and I think I walked on Nagasaki, I guess sometime between September and November when we left. But while we were in Sasebo, it was the first time we had been able to get to a ship doctor, and most of the wounded were taken care of there. After the doctor was killed, they wanted to go into my leg and see if they could find shrapnel, and I wasn't going to let a pharmacist maid cut my leg, so I didn't have anything done there. But we left Sasebo on November the 17th, and came back to San Diego, went through the Panama Canal, and our ship was decommissioned in Charleston, South Carolina, and I was discharged in June of 1946.
While you were in the service, how did you communicate with your family?
Well, after boot camp, and I figured I was going to go in the Pacific somewhere, I had a map, and I circled every spot, every island, everywhere over in the Pacific, even right up to Japan, and put a number on it. And when I wrote letters to my parents, that zip code always had that number on it, where I was at the time. So they knew exactly where I was when I was overseas.
How was the food in the U.S. Navy?
Well, it was great. I can remember sometimes sitting there eating, when you'd look up, your tray was 10 loaves down, and I was eating somebody else's tray when we'd go up and down in there. But the food was excellent. I always said it sure was a better life than eating K-rations in a mud hole somewhere.
After you discharged from the Navy, did you serve anymore?
Yes, when I got discharged from the Navy in June, I immediately went to school. I went to the University of Tennessee, and I stayed there for about 2 years on the GI Bill. And my parents, my father, got sick. My brother had already left, and that's another story. But anyway, I went and looked for a job and went to work at TVA. I went to work in February of '48 TVA, and I worked there for 40 years. I retired in February of 1988. My brother was in the Air Force, and he was shot down over the Brenner Pass over Italy, and I didn't know for a long time other than he was missing in action. And it was sometime during the time we were going from island to island, I received a whole batch of mail. The first one I received was telling me that my brother was shot down, missing in action, and two of my best friends were killed in action, and I think I threw the rest of that mail overboard. And I didn't know until the end of the war, or almost, that he was released. He was a prisoner of war in Moosburg, Germany, and he was released after that.
And what was it like your homecoming after the service?
Well, when we got to Charleston, they asked everybody, that was about 200 of us, they asked us about if we wanted to join the reserve, we could leave right then. They would discharge us that day. And since there was no Naval Reserve in Knoxville at that time, but I had to go to Nashville or Chattanooga, I declined, so I stayed there 2 more days before they discharged me. And when I got home, I guess I told them in my letters that how much I'd gained and how fat I'd gotten while I was in the Navy. And I was just as skinny as a rail almost by the time I got home, after coming all the way back and going through the canal and into Charleston. But they were expecting to see a big man, and they found a little man, but they were glad to see me.
And finally, what is it like today being a veteran of World War II?
Well, I guess at the time we come back, my wife said it was years before she even knew that I had a Purple Heart, and even that my brother was a prisoner of war. But I guess we felt like we were so lucky that we came back, and so many of our friends didn't. But nothing was really said, or no reward, no clap or fanfare for veterans at that time, as much as it is now. In the last few years, the veterans and everything have been receiving recognition from the people, and they're becoming more and more recognizable than they are now. And thanks to people like Nathan here, who works in the veterans, that's possible. I guess more people has thanked me for my service in the last year or so than they had the whole 60-something years before that.
Thank you, George, for being here today.
Appreciate it.